The silence didn't last long. Whispers spread like wildfire. Trainers nudged each other, camera crews adjusted their lenses, and the small crowd, once buzzing with casual excitement, now shifted its energy into something sharper. A collective hunger for confrontation. Dante, the Hammer Reyes, stood inches from Jason, his shadow cutting across the scuffed floor of the gym. His posture oozed aggression. Shoulders forward, chest out, hands loose but ready, like a man itching for a performance. Jason, on the other hand, stood still, his breathing measured, his gaze steady but unimpressed. He didn't flinch when Dante barked something sharp. He didn't react when the younger man puffed himself up further, pacing in small, predatory circles. Jason had seen this before. The dance of the loud, the overconfident, the ones who believed that dominance came from volume and showmanship. He kept his hands by his sides, not clenched, not raised, just there. Across the room, the young fighter Jason had helped earlier, the one who now stood half hidden behind a punching bag, watched with wide eyes. His heart pounded, not from his own drills. There are nights when a single moment can split the air, a moment so heavy, so unexpected, that it makes the world tilt and every breath around it hold still. This wasn't supposed to be one of those nights. It was just an underground fight event in Las Vegas, the kind of place where the walls reek of sweat and ambition, where sponsors hover like sharks, and where young fighters look to carve their names into blood and skin. The crowd didn't come here for lessons or morality. They came for noise, for spectacle, for someone to bleed. Jason Statham had no reason to be here. He wasn't on the card, wasn't part of the promotion, wasn't under contract. But he slipped in through a side door, hood up, head slightly bowed, not to hide, but simply to move without drawing unnecessary attention. He moved the way only a certain kind of man moves, calm, intentional, as if every muscle knew its job, as if his body had spent decades learning when to act and when to stay still. And here's the spoiler you need to hear right now. This wasn't the night Jason Statham fought for glory. It was the night someone pushed too far, and the world saw what true control looks like. If you believe in stories where quiet strength speaks louder than arrogance, if you crave seeing the line where fame meets mastery, then stay with me. And if you want more stories like this, consider subscribing, because what happened next wasn't captured in a headline. It was carved into the memory of every person in that room. Jason leaned against the cold wall of the gym, arms folded, eyes sharp but unreadable. Around him, the chaos swirled. Fighters warming up, pads smacking with the force of fists and elbows, trainers barking orders, cameras rolling for a local docuseries. But Jason wasn't watching the stars. He was watching the unnoticed, a thin, nervous teenager awkwardly trying to mirror footwork drills in a cracked mirror, stumbling over his own steps as his coach scrolled through his phone without looking up. Jason's eyes softened just slightly. Without a word, he pushed off the wall and moved closer. He crouched beside the kid, adjusted his heel slightly, tapped the back foot into alignment. A subtle shift, but one that instantly changed the boy's posture. The boy's face lit up, just a flicker, and Jason gave a quiet nod before stepping back. But someone else had seen the interaction. Across the gym floor, Dante, the Hammer Reyes, tightened his fists. Dante was everything the crowd loved. Undefeated, brash, young, cut from marble and soaked in ego. His nickname wasn't just branding. He was known for hitting like a sledgehammer, and he made sure everyone knew it. Cameras trailed him constantly, capturing his workouts, his jokes, his swagger. And tonight, Dante wasn't about to let an aging actor play the wise master in his gym. His eyes locked onto Jason, his jaw tightened, and the cameras sensed it, pivoting, refocusing, catching the spark before the fire. Jason felt the shift in the room before he turned. Years of instinct whispered through his bones. He stood upright, slowly, calmly. Dante was already closing the distance. He didn't approach quietly. He made sure the crowd saw, made sure the buzz picked up. made sure every phone lifted for a better shot. His shoulders rolled as he walked, his body language dripping with challenge. This wasn't about defense or protection. This was about dominance, about making a statement in front of every lens and every witness. Jason stayed still. His breathing didn't change, his posture didn't shift, but inside, his mind moved like a blade, cutting through every angle, every possibility, every outcome. He wasn't here to fight, but sometimes the fight comes to you. As Dante stopped just inches away, the room hushed. The trainers, the fans, the sponsors, even the teenage fighter Jason had helped, fell into a tense, electric silence. Dante didn't need to speak. His body spoke for him. The clenched fists, the squared stance, the sneer that crept across his face. Jason's gaze didn't waver. He didn't rise to the bait. He didn't puff up or play to the crowd. He simply stood, a man fully aware of his own weight, fully aware of the years carved into his body, fully aware of what he was capable of and what he was willing to walk away from. But the air had already shifted. The cameras were rolling. The crowd was salivating. And Dante wanted a show. Somewhere deep inside, Jason knew the truth. No matter what he said, no matter how he stepped back, tonight had already been set in motion. The crowd around them began to murmur. Trainers exchanged uneasy glances. The boy Jason had helped peeked nervously from behind a bag, eyes wide, clutching his towel like it was a shield. Jason's heart beat steady, not fast, not slow, just steady. He had fought men stronger. He had fought men faster. But few things were more dangerous than a young man drunk on his own legend. Dante lifted his chin, shifting his weight forward slightly, his arms loose at his sides, the stance of someone sure he controlled the room. He smiled, teeth sharp under the harsh gym lights, and took another step in. The world tightened. The crowd leaned forward. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Jason tilted his head just slightly. He wasn't here for this, but maybe, just maybe, this was exactly the moment someone like Dante needed. Without a word, Jason straightened his shoulders, letting the weight of the room settle on him fully. His feet planted firmly, his eyes locked onto Dante's. He wasn't the one looking for a fight, but if Dante demanded a lesson, the gym went silent, and the first move hadn't even been made. Just as Dante raised his hand, not in greeting, not in respect, but in challenge, Jason's breathing deepened. No words were needed. The moment had already been written. What followed would leave the room breathless. And no one, not even Dante, understood just how outmatched he truly was. The gym had never been this quiet. Not when champions trained. Not when newcomers bled their first drop on the mat. Not even when big-name scouts came looking for the next televised face. But tonight, the silence was different. Thick, electric, pulsing with tension. Dante Reyes stood in front of Jason Statham, fists loose but ready, his shoulders rolling with restless energy. His grin, wide, confident, reckless, painted him as the predator. But the stillness in Jason's eyes whispered another truth. The hunter wasn't the loudest in the room. Jason didn't flinch. He didn't posture. He simply existed, fully, powerfully, unshakably. Across the room, the young fighter, the one Jason had corrected, peeked nervously from behind a pillar. His heart pounded so loud he swore others could hear it. He wanted to look away, but he couldn't. Neither could anyone else. Phones hovered in the air, lenses blinking red. Trainers stood frozen, half lifting water bottles or towels, caught mid-motion as they watched the unfolding drama. Even the ring announcer, who usually never missed a chance to fill the air with hype, remained silent, as if sensing that something was unfolding that went beyond words. Jason had no intention of making a scene. He had come here for quiet, for observation, for reflection, maybe even nostalgia. But Dante's challenge had turned the air sharp. There was no escaping it now. Dante circled, the predator smile never leaving his face. He was younger, stronger, faster, in his prime. To the casual eye, he had every advantage. Jason, by contrast, stood still. His posture was deceptively casual, his shoulders relaxed, his breathing even. But anyone watching closely, anyone who understood, would have seen it. Jason's weight balanced perfectly over his feet, his hands loose but aligned, his gaze steady, locked not on Dante's hands but on his hips, his knees, his balance points. This wasn't arrogance. This was readiness. Dante made the first move. He leaned in, crowding Jason's space, making a point of his height, his width, his sheer physical presence. He muttered something under his breath. Not that it mattered. Words were nothing here. This was a conversation between bodies, between instincts, between truths carved in muscle and scar tissue. Jason's pulse remained steady. He was measuring Dante, not just in inches or pounds, but in something deeper. The way his breath hitched when he leaned in, the flicker of tension in his left foot, the way his shoulders rolled forward just a little too eagerly. All signs, all tells. Across the gym, the crowd shifted, restless. They wanted action, they wanted noise, they wanted to see the Hollywood actor put in his place. But Jason wasn't here for them. And he certainly wasn't here for Dante. He took one step back, slow, deliberate, a signal, not retreat, invitation. Dante's eyes gleamed. He mistook the movement for weakness, for hesitation. He squared his shoulders, lifted his chin, and let the cockiness flow through his body like a live wire. The crowd tightened its circle. Phones rose higher. A chant, soft at first, began to ripple along the walls. Hammer! 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 But Jason heard none of it. His world had narrowed, sharpened, tuned itself to the simplest elements. Weight, balance, breath. He wasn't thinking about winning. He wasn't thinking about losing. He was thinking only of the moment, the precise fraction of a second when everything would tilt and the truth of both men would be revealed. Suddenly, Dante lunged. It wasn't clean, it wasn't measured, it was raw, emotional, a surge of adrenaline wrapped in muscle. Jason pivoted, not away, not backward, but perfectly into Dante's blind spot. A small shift, invisible to the crowd, but massive in its impact. Dante stumbled, caught off balance, forced to recover. He turned sharply, eyes flashing with the sting of near embarrassment. But Jason was already reset, already waiting, already composed. The young fighter behind the pillar gasped softly. He saw it. He understood. This wasn't about brute force. It was about something else entirely. The crowd didn't know how to process what it was seeing. They wanted punches, kicks, blood, but this dance, this controlled silence was unsettling. Jason wasn't fighting to impress them. He was fighting to remind someone. Across the ring, Dante licked his lips, narrowed his eyes, and bounced lightly on his toes. He wouldn't make that mistake again. He would reset, recalibrate, and attack harder. Jason remained still. His chest rose and fell evenly. He wasn't playing Dante's game. He was playing his own. The lights overhead flickered slightly as the tension in the room reached a boiling point. Every breath seemed louder, every shift of weight on the floor echoed. The young fighter clutched his towel so tightly his knuckles whitened. He didn't know who he was rooting for anymore. He only knew he was witnessing something rare. Dante surged forward again, this time with precision, with control, with the practiced aggression of a man who knew how to finish. But Jason was already moving. Not running, not dodging. Flowing. His body angled, his weight shifted, his footwork glided. Dante's punch sliced through empty air. And in that heartbeat, that single instant of missed connection, Jason's palm lightly brushed Dante's shoulder. Not to push, not to strike, but to remind. Dante's eyes widened. He realized too late that he wasn't in control here. He never had been. The crowd roared, misunderstanding. They thought the fight was just starting, but Jason knew the fight was already over. It had ended the moment Dante believed strength was enough. As Dante stumbled back, breath ragged, eyes flickering between rage and confusion, Jason stood calmly, his body still, his gaze unwavering. He wasn't breathing hard. He wasn't even sweating. The young fighter behind the pillar stared in awe. He understood now, and just as Dante roared in frustration, stepping forward for one final, desperate assault, Jason smiled faintly for the first time. Because that was the moment he'd been waiting for. The human body has limits, but the human mind often doesn't realize them until it's too late. Dante Reyes, fueled by pride, adrenaline, and the eyes of hundreds around him, surged forward like a man possessed. His fists cut through the air with precision, his legs planted firm with practiced strength. To the cameras, to the crowd, to his followers online, he still looked like the unstoppable force they adored. But in the space between the punches, in the tiny gaps that only masters notice, the truth was unraveling. Jason Statham moved not with speed, but with clarity. He didn't need to strike first. He didn't need to dominate. He only needed to see, to read Dante's rhythm, to understand his patterns, and to wait for the inevitable crack in the armor. Across the room, the young fighter, barely 16, watched with wide, unblinking eyes. His own fists clenched instinctively, not from fear, but from something deeper, realization. He was witnessing what every fighter secretly dreams of understanding. The moment when technique eclipses raw force, when mastery silences noise. Jason's steps were small, almost imperceptible. A half pivot here, a weight shift there. His hands stayed low, relaxed, almost inviting. To the untrained eye, it might have looked like passivity. But to Dante, who now found himself lunging harder, missing by wider margins, slipping just slightly with each attack, it was maddening. The crowd's energy pulsed erratically. They wanted blood, they wanted spectacle, but what they got was tension so sharp it made their skin prickle. Jason waited. Dante's breathing quickened, sweat starting to trickle down his temple. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't prepared for an opponent who didn't take the bait, who didn't swing back wildly, who didn't need to roar to control the room. And that's when it happened. Dante overcommitted, just slightly. His shoulder rolled too far forward, his balance tipped 1 inch too much to the left, a tiny misstep, invisible to most. But to Jason, it was a door swinging open. With the smooth precision of a blade sliding into its sheath, Jason stepped forward, inside the arc of Dante's swing, and touched, just touched, the inside of his elbow. It wasn't a strike. It wasn't even a block. It was a redirect, a whisper to the body, a reminder that balance can betray the reckless. Dante staggered, his foot skidding awkwardly against the mat. His eyes flared with confusion, then fury. The crowd gasped, not because they understood what they saw, but because they felt it, the shift, the turning tide, the unspoken realization that the man they'd mocked as just an actor wasn't just surviving, he was orchestrating. Jason's breathing remained calm, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. His muscles weren't tense, his fists weren't clenched. He was present, fully, entirely, without the weight of proving anything to anyone. Dante, on the other hand, was unraveling. His movements grew sharper, but also sloppier. His swings widened, his steps thundered, his jaw clenched so tight, a vein pulsed visibly along his neck. He was no longer fighting Jason. He was fighting his own disbelief. Across the gym, the young fighter pressed closer, heart hammering. He could barely breathe. This wasn't just a fight. This was a lesson, a living, breathing masterclass unfolding before his eyes. Jason's body shifted again. A small turn of the hip, a light adjustment of his lead foot. He didn't rush. He didn't pounce. He waited, and Dante, blind to everything but his own need to win, gave him the moment. A wild right hook, a twisting lunge, a flash of anger behind the punch. Jason stepped in, smooth, effortless, and locked Dante's arm against his own shoulder. The torque was immediate. The shock was instant. Dante froze, his body pinned by a force that didn't rely on brute strength, but on leverage, on understanding, on mastery. His eyes widened, his breath caught. The crowd held its collective breath. Jason didn't slam him, he didn't humiliate him. He simply held him, firmly, like a man reminding another that there's always someone who knows a little more. And then, gently, he let go. Dante stumbled back, chest heaving, face flushed with confusion and fury. He wasn't used to this. He wasn't prepared. Jason took a single step back, planting his feet, lifting his chin slightly, not in arrogance, in invitation. The room felt like it would explode. Cameras zoomed in, trainers leaned forward. The young fighter clutched his towel to his chest, eyes shining with the weight of the moment. Dante's fists trembled at his sides. His pride demanded one last charge, one final strike, one desperate push to reclaim control. But Jason's stillness, his utter, unshakable stillness, said everything. Dante roared and surged forward. Every ounce of frustration and fury poured into his final attack. But Jason smiled, small, knowing, calm. Because this was the moment he had been waiting for all along. The human mind, when cornered by its own expectations, becomes its own worst enemy. Dante Reyes didn't know it yet, but the fight had already left his fists. It now raged inside his chest, his heart pounding faster, his breath burning his lungs, his vision narrowing until the world blurred into the single figure standing before him. Jason Statham waited, not as a fighter, not as a movie star, but as a man who understood that discipline is the sharpest weapon of all. Dante's feet pounded the mat. His fists slashed the air. The roar from his throat echoed in the cavernous gym, bouncing off the walls, stirring the crowd into a wild, chaotic fever. But Jason didn't move. He watched, measured, absorbed every fragment of Dante's fury like a stone cliff absorbs the wind. Across the gym, the young fighter, the one Jason had helped, felt his breath catch in his throat. He didn't know who to root for anymore. The man his friends had mocked as just an actor, or the champion whose name they all cheered. Somewhere a trainer whispered, "He's overextending." Another murmured, "He's burning out." But the crowd didn't notice. They only saw the sweat, the speed, the raw aggression. Jason shifted, a subtle slide of the foot, a realignment of his shoulders. His breathing stayed even, controlled, like a man standing under a waterfall without flinching. Dante swung again, a heavy right, followed by a low kick meant to take Jason's legs out from under him. But Jason wasn't there. A pivot, a half step, a rotation so fluid it looked like water moving around stone. Dante stumbled, his knee buckling for just a second, his balance flickering, his eyes flared wide. His chest rose and fell, ragged now, the shine of confidence slipping into the sweat dripping from his temples. Jason didn't press forward, he didn't attack. He didn't need to, because in that moment, in that crack of doubt slicing through Dante's mind, the fight began to collapse. The cameras zoomed in, hoping to catch the exact instant of reversal, the moment when the cocky young fighter realized the tide had turned. The crowd too began to shift uneasily. Some cheered louder, forcing energy into the space. Others fell into an uncertain hush, sensing but not yet understanding that something had gone terribly wrong. Jason's eyes softened, just a fraction. He wasn't here to humiliate. He wasn't here to destroy. He was here to teach. Dante came again, teeth clenched, eyes wide, fists swinging, not with precision, but with desperation. He lunged, twisted, tried to overpower Jason with sheer momentum, but Jason caught him. Not with a punch, not with a strike, but with a perfectly timed shift, a redirection, a guide. Dante's own force betrayed him, sending him stumbling off balance, skidding slightly on the mat, breath catching in surprise. Jason exhaled slowly. He stepped forward, not to press an advantage, but to close the distance, to deliver the quietest, sharpest message possible. Across the gym, the young fighter pressed both hands to his mouth, eyes wide, heart thundering. This was mastery. This was the line between a fighter and a master, and he knew, deep in his bones, that he was watching something he would never forget. Dante's chest heaved, his fists trembled, his jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached, and Jason stood there, unmoving, unshaken, waiting. The crowd's energy broke, unsure whether to roar or whisper. The tension twisted into something fragile, delicate, the hush before a fall, the breath before a collapse. And Dante, blind to it all, came one last time. He charged, every ounce of frustration, rage, and humiliation pouring into a final desperate strike. His foot lifted, his fist cocked, his entire body lunged forward like a storm unleashed. But Jason was already inside the moment. He ducked, twisted, stepped through the attack, his hands sliding gently across Dante's arm, redirecting the force with the grace of a dancer and the precision of a surgeon. Dante's body spun, not because Jason forced it, but because momentum is a cruel master. His knee hit the mat. His hands slapped the ground. His chest heaved once, twice, and then he froze. Jason stood over him, calm, centered, steady. He didn't raise his fists. He didn't shout. He simply looked down, breathing slowly, silently, as if to say, "It's over. Let it go." The young fighter behind the pillar couldn't breathe. His eyes stung. His heart pounded so hard it felt like a drum in his chest. He understood now. It wasn't about the punches. It wasn't about the show. It was about the truth underneath it all. Strength is quiet. Mastery doesn't shout. Real power is knowing when not to break the man in front of you. Dante's fists clenched one last time, shaking, trembling, teeth gritted as if he might rise again. But Jason leaned forward, not with anger, not with menace, but with quiet finality. And as their eyes locked, Dante felt something shift deep inside. Not fear, not defeat, but understanding. Because Jason hadn't come here to win. He had come here to show him. The room was frozen. Dante Reyes, kneeling on the mat, fists trembling, chest heaving, stared up at Jason Statham. And for the first time that night, the weight of silence pressed heavier than the roar of any crowd. No one in the gym spoke. No one dared. The cameras, once hungry for spectacle, now captured something far more rare, the raw, unfiltered moment when a man meets the limit of his own pride and is forced to look beyond it. Jason stood still, not towering, not gloating, not demanding, just present, grounded with the calm gravity of a man who had been here before, who knew this space, this tension, this delicate point where strength could shift into cruelty or into wisdom. Dante's fists slowly unclenched. His shoulders sagged, the breath rushing out of him like a storm passing, leaving behind only exhaustion and a flicker of understanding. Across the room, the young fighter, the one Jason had helped, the one hiding half behind a punching bag, heart pounding, watched with wide, unblinking eyes. He saw the lesson, not in the strikes, not in the takedowns, but in this moment where a master chose not to crush the one kneeling before him. Jason lowered his gaze slightly, the barest hint of a nod passing between them. Not to belittle, not to mock, but to acknowledge. You stood, you came, and now you know. Dante exhaled shakily, his hands pressing to the mat as he pushed himself upright, unsteady but whole. His eyes flickered, searching Jason's face for anger, for triumph, for punishment, but found none. Only stillness, only control, only the quiet, unyielding truth of a man who had no need to finish what had already been decided. The crowd's noise shifted, uneasy, uncertain. They had come for a brawl, a knockout, a headline. Instead, they had witnessed something deeper, something many didn't yet understand. Jason turned, slowly, deliberately. He walked away, leaving the ring, the cameras, the tension behind. Each step echoed in the hollow hush, not because of its weight, but because of what it left behind. A room full of people questioning what they had just seen, questioning what they thought they knew about power, fame, and strength. The young fighter pressed his hands over his chest, feeling his own heartbeat, feeling the fire of inspiration light somewhere deep inside him. He would remember this night, not for the punches, not for the almost fight, but for the lesson. Jason moved through the crowd without a word, without a backward glance. The trainers parted for him. The sponsors, once eager to mock, now stood awkwardly, shifting on their feet, their grins dimming. Even the loudest voices had gone quiet, watching the man they once saw as just a Hollywood face walk with a grace that needed no explanation. Outside, the night air hit cool and sharp. Jason pulled up his hood, inhaling deeply, feeling the peace that only comes after a test passed. Not because it was demanded, but because it was needed. Inside, the gym began to stir again, the noise slowly returning, but it would never be the same. Because every person there, whether they admitted it or not, had seen something they couldn't unsee. That real mastery isn't loud, it isn't cruel, it doesn't need an audience, it just is. Back inside, Dante sat on the edge of the mat, wiping sweat from his brow, breathing slow and deep, eyes distant. For the first time in years, no cameras crowded him, no trainers hyped him up, no fans shouted his name. He sat in the quiet, staring at his own hands, wondering, maybe for the first time, what it really meant to fight, to learn, to grow. Across the gym, the young fighter gathered his things, still dazed, still overwhelmed, but burning with a new kind of resolve. He looked toward the door where Jason had left, and for a moment, the edges of a smile touched his lips. He would remember, and one day, maybe, he would pass that lesson on. Jason walked into the night, footsteps soft on the pavement. A man content not because he had won, but because he had taught. Final reflection, closing words. There are fights that fill arenas. There are fights that fill headlines. And then there are fights that fill a man's soul, that remind him and everyone watching that the quietest victories are the ones that last the longest. Jason Statham didn't come to the gym that night to prove anything. But when the moment came, he proved the one thing that mattered. True strength is silent. True mastery is patient. And the loudest man in the room is rarely the one in control.